Hello everyone, my name is Tabor Swatsky. I'm with Gopher and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Gopher Solutions webinar. For those of you who are new to our webinar series, this is a monthly webinar focusing on a variety of physical education subjects and topics. Past webinar topics have included physical education teachers presenting on specific activities like assessment and fitness. Some of our past presenters have included Dr. Robert Pangrazi, Dr. John Medina. Our presenters have done a great job of bringing topics and information that have been useful to the field of PE. Our webinars will almost always occur the third week of the month going forward. All attendees of today's webinar will receive a certificate of participation for 1 hour of educational credit. And one of our webinar attendees, will also win an Active Academics Fitness and Literacy Activities Pack for their class, plus a copy of Gene's book, Thinking on Your Feet. Today's webinar is titled Meeting Common Core Standards Through Physical Education with Gene Blaydes. And I know this is a topic that a lot of educators in general have been talking about, and physical education teachers are often wondering, how do we address common core standards through physical education? And Gene's going to touch on some of that today. Today's webinar, Gene Blaydes, author and owner at Action-Based Learning, will teach you how to integrate fitness with math, literacy, and health for a fun way to increase understanding and retention in your students. And before I introduce our presenter, I wanted to mention that we will have the chance for questions throughout the presentation. So if something comes up during the presentation that you have a question on, feel free to ask it on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll accumulate the questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a chance to answer as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation with Gene. So today I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter, Gene Blaydes. Gene is an internationally known educational consultant, speaker, and author on the subject of how brain research supports the link of movement to enhanced learning. She has made hundreds of presentations internationally in 10 foreign countries and nationally in all 50 states. Gene taught for 27 years in the classroom, in physical education, and as a college professor. Her excellence in teaching is recognized by awards such as Richardson Independent School District Teacher of the Year, Texas AFERD Teacher of the Year, and one of 6 National Elementary Physical Education Teacher of the Year, representing 13 states in the Southern District. Gene received the 2005 PE for Life Advocacy Award, and Gene received the 2013 Margie R. Hansen Distinguished Service Award, awarded by NASPE and AFERD. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter, Gene Blaydes. Thanks, Gene.
Thank you, Tabor. I appreciate your inviting me to do this, and thanks to Gopher for getting all of these people together, all these wonderful professionals, so we can learn about a very important subject, which is meeting the common core standards through physical education. I'm sitting here at my desk in beautiful Addison, Texas, where outside it's about 66 degrees and beautiful. So I was laughing about doing a webinar. I'm not used to being a talking head. I'm used to getting up and showing people things. But this will be interactive in that we will pretend that we are standing up and doing activities if you'll go along with me on that. So let's get started. We're going to talk about meeting the common core standards through physical education. And we're educators, and we should know about our brain. We should know how our brain works, how it grows, how it remembers, why it forgets. We should know how the brain processes reading. And if we don't, then this is a good time for us to realize that the brain research is really supporting what we do in physical education. For instance, do you know where in your brain you pay attention? Well, that's pretty important because we have some kids that are deficit in their attention, so we give them a disorder called attention deficit disorder. And if they're a little hyperactive, then we kick the H in there for ADHD. But now the new research is telling us about how movement, physical activity, and exercise can help to increase attention and focus. By the way, we pay attention in our brain in the prefrontal cortex, which is right in your forehead, right behind your forehead. That's the prefrontal cortex. That's where we pay attention. And with the research on the teen brain, we know that the teen brain, their prefrontal cortex is not working in the same way. It's kind of on vacation. So we can activate that paying attention through the prefrontal cortex through activity. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. Do you know that you can increase the capacity to learn? This is kind of new information because before the brain research was telling us, we thought that you just were born with this much capacity to learn, it didn't change. But now we know we can increase working memory, we can increase our ability to remember, and we can also give the brain more capacity to learn. And part of that is through exercise when we grow new brain cells. We can also increase memory and retention and retrieval. And what helps to do that is our memory pathways, and part of that whole mechanism is involved in how we put the brain and body back into balance. Also, acting things out through movement will help to retain information and retrieve information. How does the brain put patterns into a sequence? Patterns such as a recipe or a lesson plan, but also patterns like letters into words, words into sentences, sentences into stories. Where does that happen in the brain? Just so happens that happens in the cerebellum, which is exactly where our motor skills, agility, and coordination is housed, and so we can improve that whole process through movement. How do you prime the brain for learning, and how do you know they're ready to learn, and how do you know if they're prepared to learn? There's a great deal of research on how exercise, physical activity, and movement primes the brain for learning, very specifically primes certain areas of the brain. And we're going to touch on a little bit about different brains and different learners. How do different people and different brains learn? For instance, how does the teenage brain learn, and how is that different than the elementary brain? We're going to talk about brains in poverty when they're under such great stress, what happens in the brain. And then here's a question that many of us deal with on a daily basis. How do you motivate and engage the reluctant learner? What about that student that doesn't want to get up and move? What about that student that doesn't want to do math? How can you motivate and engage the reluctant learner? Part of that is through getting the brain and the body back into balance through movement, physical activity, and exercise. So that being said, this neuroscience that we are dealing with now, it's called cognitive neuroscience. How do we learn? The science of learning and how do we process information is amazing with the new sophisticated brain imaging that they now have, where they can see the brain working in real time. Neuroscientists are telling us that it's important that kids move to learn. It's important that kids are physically fit. But what does that look like in the classroom? What does that look like in the gymnasium? If we know that kids move to learn, if we know that movement facilitates cognition, if we know that exercise boosts brain function, then what does that look like in the classroom? And many times you hear people say something is brain-based or brain-compatible. What does that mean? When something's brain-based or something is brain-compatible, when it's brain-based, that means that it's based on facts that we know in the neuroscience that tell us how the brain works or how the brain processes information or how the brain functions. For instance, we know that the brain is a pattern seeker. Well, that's brain-based. We know that exercise grows brain cells. That's a brain fact. But then when it's brain-compatible, that means you take that brain fact and you translate it into strategies or lessons that apply those principles of neuroscience. So if we know that exercise boosts brain function, obviously we need more exercise throughout the school day. Many of our students, as you know, don't have physical education every single day. So we need to get them more physically active through the process of all day, before, during, and after school, and then out of school hours too. So when we say something is brain-based and brain-compatible, that's the difference. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Physical education is brain-based and brain-compatible. because our curriculum stands alone by itself very nicely. We don't have to teach reading, math, social studies, science, and physical education in order to put the brain and body back into balance, in order to get the brain and body at its more optimal learning state. So what we do in physical education speaks very well to how the brain works, how it grows, how it remembers, how it develops. So we are brain-based and brain-compatible. And as I'm going to show you in the next few slides, physical education is not only important in the learning process, it is central to the learning process. Many of the neuroscientists are telling us that what makes us move is also what makes us think. That movement lays the foundation for other learning. So with that being said then, we are talking today about how physical education then is brain-based, brain-compatible. Where's the brain research? People say that to me all the time. Do you have any research on that? And I say, yep, we do. And each one of these bullets that you see on the screen here is supported by research. Now, where do you find this research? It's in many, it's available in many different places, but you can find a compilation of this research in Dr. Rady's book called Spark. I've tried to make a collection on my website, which is actionbasedlearning.com, where you can go and find out the research on how exercise creates miracle growth for the brain, on how exercise puts the brain and body back into balance to improve mood and behavior. So each one of these bullet points is backed by research and shows that what we do in physical education prepares the brain for learning, primes the brain for learning, and gets that brain ready to learn. So we're talking today about meeting the standards in Common Core. Well, 45 of our states have Common Core. There are 5 states that have not yet adopted Common Core. That would be Texas, Nebraska, Minnesota, Alaska, and West Virginia. But in each of those states, we have state standards that are to be met that are very similar to the standards that are outlined in Common Core. So when I say what is Common Core, what is this new initiative? Well, let's pretend that you're in an elevator and the doors open and the president of Coca-Cola walks in, and he or she happens to be a parent of one of the kids that you teach. And this parent asks you, okay, what is this Common Core that I'm hearing about? How is it different than what teachers have been doing for the last 10 years? And how is it going to help my child to learn? So let's pretend you have about 18 seconds in the elevator to tell that parent, who might be a supporter in the future, maybe even give you a grant, what is Common Core? So we're going to do a poll right now, and here's the choices. You get to vote. It's on the side of your screen right now. What do you think Common Core is? Choose A, B, C, or D, and go ahead and start responding to that now, if you will. You'll have about, I think it's about 45 seconds to make a choice. And as you're doing this, let me tell you why this particular little activity that I just did with the elevator speech, why it's brain-based and why it's brain-compatible. This is something you could do with your students as well, is to pose a question and have them have about 18 seconds to give a response. And that is because with the new research on memory, it says when new information comes into the brain has about 18 seconds to process it, to either figure out, is this important or do I lose it? Is this something that's going to make me a better human being? Is this going to help me survive? And so for about 18 seconds, you have the opportunity to convince that brain to hold on to that information. After about 18 seconds, then, then it either disappears or you hold on to it. Well, it looks like our poll is finished. This was kind of a trick question because Common Core is kind of all of these things. It is thinking about thinking. So those of you that put A, you're right. It is about thinking about thinking. It's about how do you process, how do you get to that answer. So Common Core is encouraging our kids to think at a deeper level. It's also thinking, and if you put B, you're correct, it's about how do you process information, what skills are you using, what strategies are you using to process. So if you put B, you're also correct. If you chose C, you're exactly right. One of the very specific outcomes for Common Core that is stated on their website, which is www.corestandards.org, it says we are preparing students for career and college, so that's exactly right. And if you put no longer teaching to the test, it's not exactly stated that way, but that's also part of Common Core, is that teachers are being encouraged now to use different teaching methods to get to the same result, to have common, if you will, skills and standards across the states that are doing Common Core. And so the test this time is not just teaching to the standardized test, but to use common strategies and skills. So all of those are correct. Now, what makes it different than what we've been doing before is that it's trying to be consistent across the states, and that's never been done before. So that's what makes it different. So now we're physical educators. Let's do an 18-second elevator speech. What is physical education? Let's pretend someone has no idea what physical education is. And you're going to give a definition of physical education. What is a good definition? Now, in this elevator speech, you are also going to not speak educationese. You know how we use terms like, oh, it has rigor, or, you know, we use our education terms. Don't do that. What is physical education? So think about that for a moment, and then let's take this poll. Choose either A, B, C, or D. This is not a trick question, by the way. And see which one you think would be the definition of physical education. And we have a lot of our people in educational circles sometimes get physical education mixed up with physical activity or even athletics. They think that it's all the same. In some of our states, we're cutting back on physical education in lieu of more academic time. I've been working with people that see their students, once or twice every 6 days. And so kids are not getting as much physical education as they need. So what is a good definition of physical education? And another good question for us, maybe this is another topic, is how has physical education changed over the decades? How is it different than 10 years ago? Or is it different than 10 years ago? Because physical education means different things to different people. I have talked to people who really think that physical education is athletics. Well, here's our poll results. Wow, 68% of you chose D. There are 23% of you had no answer, sprinkled out above the others. So teaching students fitness and sports skills is part of physical education. So is teaching students to be physically literate, teaching body management. But D, the one that most of you chose, is teaching students to manage their physical needs for a lifetime of balanced health and wellness. Now notice the words that, if you're in the elevator and you're talking to a parent, look at the words that would pop out at you. Manage their physical needs for a lifetime, and they're balanced in their health and wellness. Those words are what stick out in their mind. I sometimes say that we're teaching kids in physical education, we're teaching 8-year-olds and 18-year-olds how to be 80 years old and be able to carry 2 sacks of groceries up 2 flights of stairs, because it is for a lifetime. So now that we know what kind of a definition, if you will, of Common Core, what makes it different, and a definition of physical activity, let me give you some definitions that are coming from the Neuroscience. You hear me talk about movement, physical activity, and exercise. So what is the definitions? What are we looking at? Movement is the big umbrella that means not being still. Shaking your hands would be a form of movement. Standing up and doing a jumping jack would be a form of movement. So it encompasses all movement, not being still. Physical activity is movement that expends a little bit more energy. Walking to the door would be movement. Skipping to the door would be physical activity because that involves a little more energy. Exercise, especially when you look at it through the research, means getting your heart rate into the target heart rate zone and sustaining that elevation for a period of time. Now, the period of time is up for review, but most people would agree 30 minutes a day, most days a week for adults. For school-age children, as you know, the recommendation is 60 minutes of physical activity a day, every day, 30 minutes of which should be in their target heart rate zone, and it doesn't have to be 30 consecutive minutes. So coming from organizations like the Center of Disease Control, Robert Woods Johnson Foundation, they're telling us kids need to be active, hence Fuel Up to Play 60. That's where the 60 came from. So we do all of these in physical education, and we encourage our classroom teachers to also use movement, physical activity, and exercise so that kids can have this throughout the day. When you talk about movement, there's some good research that said movement facilitates cognition. Now look at those three words. Movement facilitates, makes cognition possible. Cognition is the act of thinking and the act of learning. But it needs to be movement with intention because that's what anchors the learning. For instance, I call it KIDS, kinesthetic instructional differentiation strategies, using our bodies in order to understand information, using our bodies to anchor information is KIDS. Then also, we talk about changing a brain, and the question is, can you change a brain? Well, that's an interesting question for educators because we go, yeah, sure you can, but the new research is it's pinpointing how that happens, and that's called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change. So yes, you can change a brain, which is really important, but here's even more exciting, you can influence the change of the brain. And that's called epigenetics, the new science that is telling us that some genes can and do change. Some genes are fixed, like the genes for your hair color or your height. Those are fixed. But some genes can change, and the genes that can change are genes for behavior, can also be physical genes. For instance, if I'm going to go to work out, and I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to lift weights. I go to the gym, and so far I haven't picked up any weights, but as soon as I pick up those weights, the genes that I have been given for my strength, my power, my muscular endurance, even my stamina, and also my motivation, notice that there's an emotional one in there, those genes switch on because I need them while I'm lifting weights. As soon as I put those weights down, those genes switch off. So that's an example of how some genes switch on and switch off. With the research on the brains in poverty or brains under stress, we can see that some of the genes are switching on and not switching off, or vice versa. And guess what? One of the very best ways you can change a brain to the positive, immediately almost, is exercise. Because when you exercise, that puts the brain and the body back into balance. Because brains can and do change. And the brain is only as healthy as the body that carries it. Now, how can you make that statement? Because the brain does not store its own fuel, nor does it produce its own fuel. It's totally reliant on the body to get that fuel up to the brain. Right now, about 20% of your blood supply is in your brain. It's nourishing your brain, bringing it nutrients and getting rid of the toxins. And we now know that healthy, active kids make better learners. So here's the bulletin board for your next 6 weeks. There's just the good news. This is what will put you back into balance physically, and the acronym is NEWS: nutrition, exercise, water, and sleep. So it's all about getting the kids back into balance. And notice this is exactly what we do in physical education. This is what we teach. So when you ask people, why do you need to exercise, sometimes they'll say things like, well, I need to lose weight, or I'm warding off disease, or I just want to be healthy, it's my New Year's resolution, I want to get into a Speedo or a bikini, I don't know. Why do people exercise? Well, here's what we know through the science. Physical education prepares that brain for learning through exercise. Physical education primes the brain for learning with specific patterns like crossing the midline, for instance. We also know that the positive benefits of physical activity last for 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the person. Now, notice that's physical activity. So if the classroom teacher allows the children to get up and move around doing a movement with intention, then they're going to be in focus for about 15 to 20 minutes. And the positive benefits of exercise, and that's when you get your heart rate up, last for about 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the person. So the very best time to give a test or to introduce new information is right after they've come back from a great physical education class, which justifies the need for daily quality physical education taught by a professional with all the equipment and all the facilities we need. I'm going to piggyback on that one. It's not on the slide, but some recent research showed that when school-age children are physically fit, that their positive benefits of exercise right after they've exercised will last like 12 to 16 hours because their body is in a constant state of balance. Which means that no peaks and valleys. So that's why we need daily physical education, daily quality physical education. And then the last one says that exercise balances the neurotransmitters for mood and reduced impulsivity. We know, too, that when the brain and body are back into balance, then you're going to have the students be more engaged. They're going to behave better. They're not going to be so impulsive. So that's why we exercise, not just to get into a bikini or a Speedo. And where do you have the research on that? A wonderful compilation of research is Dr. John Rady's book called Spark, and it's the revolutionary new science of exercise in the brain. And he outlines in his book much of the research that I have been showing you. So that's a really good resource for you. But here's what he says in Spark. The reason why we exercise is to benefit the brain. And exercise benefits the brain first. Before it even benefits the body, it benefits the brain. How do we know that? Because exercise changes the brain at a molecular level. In other words, you can see the changes. It brings fuel to the brain, oxygen and glucose. It grows, exercise grows new brain cells. That's the neurogenesis. Exercise increases memory by actually strengthening the secondary dendritic branching on the neuron. So that is a structural improvement. Exercise puts the neurotransmitters back into balance. And exercise creates a protein called BDNF. I'm going to explain that a little bit more in just a few slides. But BDNF is the miracle grow for the brain. It stands for brain-derived neurotropic factor. All of that happens when you exercise. We're designed to exercise. It's encoded in our genes. We're designed as humans to cover about, let me see if I can remember, about 20 miles a day on foot. Of that 20 miles, about 8 of those miles is supposed to be by running. That's how our brains developed. That's how our brains grew. We're designed not to run faster than an antelope can run, but we're designed to outlast an antelope. We're designed for cardiovascular endurance. But that's not happening in our society now. We're also designed to play. The younger kids don't have the cardiovascular endurance to run a mile, so the way their brain develops early on is through play. Run, hop, skip, jump, gallop, fall, climb, all of the things that develops the brain comes from play, as well as language acquisition, socialization, problem solving, group awareness. All of that comes through play. That's how we're designed. Now, I want you to look. This is a study that was done by Dr. Michael Hopkins in 2012. Look at how he titled this study, Exercise Makes You Smarter. I mentioned BDNF, and that is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And brain-derived neurotrophic factor is a protein that we're all born with. Now, here's the good news. We have plenty of BDNF. We'll never run out. It is stored in our large muscles, like your legs, even your core muscles, your back muscles. Your large muscles have BDNF. So that when we move, the BDNF is released in the body and it fertilizes the brain. Now so that means that's what happens just when we move. But if you want to get more BDNF, it's increased when you exercise. So exercise increases the supply of BDNF. So Dr. Michael Hopkins did research on school-age children with ADHD. And what he discovered was they have lower levels of BDNF. Now, by the nature of ADHD, they want to move all the time. Their body and their brain is telling them, move, move. But in the classroom, we're telling them, sit still, be quiet, don't say anything. So it's biological warfare for the kids with ADHD because they want to move. So when they come to physical education, we are giving them what they need to get more BDNF in their brain, and we're actually helping those kids with ADHD. That's why things like exercise balls in the classroom are really good for those kids with ADHD. There's another study that just came out that's not on the slide about how exercise can maybe be the cure for Alzheimer's, because the scientists were looking at BDNF and discovered that BDNF, housed in our big muscles, is carried through the bloodstream by it's a chemical called irisin. And the irisin carries the BDNF through the bloodstream to fertilize that brain. And what they did with some rats is they took that irisin, made artificial irisin, and they injected it in rats that were designed to have Alzheimer's. And when they put the irisin in the rats that were in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, nothing happened. But when they injected the rats that were in the mid stages of Alzheimer's, the irisin seemed to slow the progression significantly. But when they put the irisin in the rats that had yet to get Alzheimer's, it almost halted the onset of Alzheimer's. Wow, really? So where does the irisin come from? It comes from exercise. So exercise could actually be one of the cures for Alzheimer's. Now, of course, you know, and I know, that they're going to try to make artificial irisin, I'm sure, with the pharmaceutical companies, but you don't have to. We have it in our schools right now. It's called physical education. Dr. Hillman, who is from Illinois, did a research on how aerobic exercise increases learning. Look at the link there. This was in 2013. You may have seen these pictures before, but they were looking at, these are SPECT scans of brain activity. The more vibrant the colors, the yellow, orange, red, that means more activity in the brain is available. These are the same kids that they were doing the SPECT scan on. The brain on the left is when kids were sitting quietly and then doing the cognitive task. The brain on the right was after they had gotten their heart rate up for 20 minutes on a treadmill. And obviously their brain is much more active. So which brain do you want taking your test? One of the pieces of research that came out in 1999 and then again in 2006 in human research says that exercise grows brain cells. I'll go back to the first slide. So can we increase the capacity of the brain to learn? Yes, because exercise gives you actually more neurons, more thinking cells. Now, that doesn't make you smarter, but it gives you more capacity to learn. And if we have the kids exercising every day, then they have more capacity to learn. And we now know that about 85% of our kids prefer to process through their bodies. It's called embodied cognition, acting things out, seeing it, hearing it, saying it, doing it, using more of their senses, putting their acting things out like punctuation or acting out parts of speech, and that helps to anchor that learning even better. But we're into a lot of sitness right now in our society. We do a lot of sitting. We sit to eat, we sit to be entertained, we sit to learn. We're into a lot of sitness and not a lot of fitness. And the research that came out actually from the American Cancer Society said that sitting is the new smoking. It's almost as dangerous for your brain as smoking. And that's a pretty powerful statement. Dr. Medina, who wrote a book called Brain Rules, says that the chair is the least effective environment for learning. Now, we've been talking for about 30 minutes, I think. So it's time for you to stand up and move around, stretch, get up, move around, because we know that if a human sits for longer than about 17 minutes, plus or minus 2, the physiology of the brain and the body starts to change. So just by standing up and stretching, you can change the physiology of your body. Dr. Medina says that here's a quote from his book, "The human brain appears to have been designed to solve problems relating to surviving in an outdoor setting in unstable meteorological conditions, and to do so in near constant motion. So, if you wanted to design a learning environment that was directly opposed to what the brain is naturally good at doing, you'd design a frickin' classroom." Now, also in that quote, he talks about in physical education, our environment. We're moving around outside in unstable conditions. We're doing what's the most brain compatible for the brain. So now the way that information flows in your brain is critical to learning. We know that information flows side to side, and that's left to right in the brain, and that goes across a midline in your brain called the corpus callosum. And we know that information goes back and forth, front to back in your brain. That crosses another midline in your brain called the motor cortex. And that's us getting our ideas to the paper. Side to side would be an example of that would be decoding and comprehending. When the information goes back and forth, an example would be getting ideas of what you're thinking to the paper. And then information flows up and down in your brain, and that's going through your limbic system, which is the emotional part of your brain, into your higher level thinking. And if I go back to our Common Core slide, we talked about higher order thinking skills, getting the kids to process. Now notice this, we only have 3 basic motor movements, of which all of our motor movements are designed. One of them is walking, another is jumping, another is rolling. Walking, of which crawling is a prerequisite, is information front to back in the brain. Jumping is information up and down in the brain, and rolling is information side to side. And all of this is developed when we were babies. Babies roll, then they crawl, then they stand up. They go through very specific developmental stages to grow that brain and develop that brain. So Dr. Blaydes says that what makes us move is also what makes us think. How do we get the brain ready to learn? And here's the research that came from Dr. Buddy in 2008, talking about, they were looking at where in the brain do we pay attention, and that's the prefrontal cortex. And they had someone reading, and they noticed that when someone focused on something, that the cerebellum lit up first on the brain imaging, and then the prefrontal cortex. Now, the cerebellum is our motor skills, agility, coordination. It's the little brain that hangs below the big brain. So they were looking at that and going, wait, what is it? Well, now they know that the cerebellum is what initiates putting patterns into a sequence, like letters into words, words into sentences, sentences into stories. So look what he says. If the cerebellum is not working, motor skills, agility, coordination, a little bit of balance, then cognitive function suffers. But when you use the cerebellum in patterns and skills, and especially the ones that cross the midline, that enlists more parts of the brain and develops your attention center. So, physical educators, you are now cerebellular trainers. You can put that on your business card. Because what we do in physical education, everything we do in physical education crosses the midline. So we are developing the very parts of the brain that we need to pay attention with. So how do you know they're ready to learn? This is very interesting. We are hardwired, which means we are born with the ability to interpret, express, and understand just 6 basic emotions. And they are joy, anger, surprise, disgust, sadness, and fear. This is our treasure chest of emotions. This is what we will go back to every single time. Now notice in that list, only 2 of those could be perceived as positive. That's probably because we're more hardwired to deal with negative than we are positive, or deal with, probably for survival, to deal with negative things. So let's say a child, you ask them to do something, and they cross their arms and go, I am not doing that. I don't like you anymore. So they're showing anger and disgust. So if you want any emotions other than these 6, you have to teach it. You have to teach it. We have to teach emotions. Otherwise, you'll just get those basic 6. Now, this is not an exhaustive list at all of emotions that are taught, but look at the list. This is exactly what we do in physical education. Part of our physical education curriculum is not just physical, it's also the emotional aspect of the brain. It's also the social aspect of the brain, which is another reason why we can prepare the brain for learning through our physical education curriculum. Now, in the Common Core language, you will hear building cognitive capacity. Building cognitive capacity means working from a framework. And as I showed you in the couple of slides before, where what we do lays the framework for all learning, we can build that cognitive capacity. In physical education, for example, if I don't teach them how to skip in elementary PE, they're going to have a hard time doing a layup in middle school. They're going to have a hard time spiking the ball in volleyball. So we build that cognitive capacity. The new research is telling us that we can increase working memory. That's great news, because some of our kids, you know, need to work on their memory. And that's where we can link to the classroom very well. We do brain challenges like gotcha. And this one I'm not going to have time to do, but basically it's an activity where you're working with a partner and you stick out your right hand, and then they put their left, and then you put your left index finger in the hand of the person that you're working with, so you're touching the center of their palm. And then on signal gotcha, you try to grab the finger that's standing up in your palm, but at the same time escape by pulling your finger away. And it reacts with the prefrontal cortex being very reactive. So what you're doing is, in this activity, you're building on the basic activity, which is gotcha, where you're reacting, you're crossing the midline, you're activating that prefrontal cortex, and then you build upon that with these activities. In math, you can do activities like rock, paper, scissors with math, so that you do your rock, paper, scissors by pounding your fist 3 times and say, I love math, and then on show, you show any number of fingers or thumbs on one hand between 0 and 5, and between you and your partner, the first one who comes up with the sum wins. And then you can do more and more activities built on that. In language arts, we can, through action, we can act out punctuation marks, we can act out stories, we can act out sentences. All of these activities are found in my book called Thinking on Your Feet. One of you is going to win that. Now, I'm going to kind of brag for a minute and tell you that I think I coined the phrase brain breaks probably about 20 years ago. But now I backed off of that. I don't want to take a brain break because then you die. So now I call them brain energizers. But we need to use different types of movement for different situations. Energizers is what we're really good at, just getting that blood to flow. Fitness you can do in the classroom as well. Cooperative peer teaching, sometimes working with another group so that you can get lots of brains working. Transition times, you're going from this activity to this activity. Why not do something that has academics attached to it? Specifically reinforcing academics, like our parts of speech or action punctuation. Reviewing information that they've already learned so that they can bring it out, build on it, put it back in. Assessment, how do you know they know? And do you know they know, or they don't know they know, or they know they don't know, or they don't know they don't know, or they don't care if they know or not? That's assessment. And there's activities we can do with that to help. And then sometimes, just for fun, that's a good one. We teach different brains and different learners. I am so excited to show you this new information about teaching the brain in poverty and how exercise directly counterbalances the ill effects of poverty. Now, when I say the word poverty, most people think of low socioeconomic status. The actual definition of poverty is deprivation, being deprived. Another definition, toxic stress. When the brain is under that much stress, it changes. Watch this. When you're under stress, physiologically, stress shrinks the neurons in the very part of the brain that you read with, your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex, your hippocampus. So the kids might be learning the same, but they're going to remember differently. Now watch this. Here's the slide of the century. When your neurons are under stress, now this is physiologically, you get a weaker signal, handle less blood flow, process less oxygen, your neurons are not communicating. Right after you're physically active, right after exercise, look what happens. Exercise directly counterbalances the ill effects of that poverty, plus you grow new brain cells, plus you reduce your stress, and you improve your mood. So I hope I've convinced you that what you do in physical education is not only important in the learning process, it is central to the learning process. The way it links back to the Common Core, how do we meet those standards? Our curriculum prepares the brain for learning. It primes the brain for learning. We can anchor that learning through movement. We can anchor specific academic content in reading and math through movement. What we do is central to the learning process. We are allowing that brain to go back to the classroom. There is good research that says that we're improving academic performance, we're improving mood and behavior, so there's less discipline referrals, and we're increasing attendance, all things that principals look at. So hopefully you've gotten some good information. Here's my contact information in case you would like to contact me or visit our website, which is actionbasedlearning.com, and that's where the research is. So, Tabor, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Jean. Feel free, like I said earlier, to ask any questions you might have in the panel on the side of your screen. I think it's on the right-hand side. And we do have a couple of questions here. One of the things that people are asking is, can they get a copy of the PowerPoint? And if you've registered for the webinar, you will get an email with a recorded version of today's PowerPoint. I know a lot of people are interested in being able to show this to their colleagues and maybe even their administrators. One question, Jean, that we had, we're going to be giving away the Active Academics Fitness and Literacy Activities Pack. And this equipment pack includes your book, Thinking on Your Feet. And in our Gopher equipment pack, our lesson plan features 9 unique activities from your book. Can you speak to maybe one of the, and in the description it talks about alphabetization, sign language, word formation, sentence composition, some of those sorts of things. Can you speak to some of the academic concepts in your book that are academic and physical education related, to kind of just, get at some of that Common Core stuff about how you can embed the academic piece into some of the physical education teaching.
Definitely. My book has got about 200 activities that link directly to math, reading, science, social studies, health, nutrition. And the way that my book came about was I'm a physical educator by trade, and these were lessons that I did in my physical education class that linked the academics to what we were doing. In other words, if I was doing a relay, I might do a relay on place value. If I was doing a tag game, I might link the literature, the Three Little Pigs tag. So each one of these lessons in my book called Thinking on Your Feet directly link back to the Common Core about how we in physical education can teach specific academic content through the physical, through kinesthetics. So
okay.
That's
thanks.
And the activity pack that is going to be given away today that is available through Gopher is the equipment that you need for many of the lessons in my book, not just a few of them. So
okay. Great.
Help.
One question we had was about music in physical education, and the question is, does music do some of the similar things when used with exercise? And I think what's meant by similar things as far as stimulating the brain, like an academic type of a lesson done through physical education might do also.
Definitely. Lots of research on that, too. Movement is music, and music is movement. If you think about what we're doing in physical education, most everything we do has a beat to it. Even walking, skipping has a different beat or rhythm to it. But what music does for the brain specifically is that it is part of our language acquisition. We don't talk like this. We talk with a rhythm, a pitch, and a tone to our language. So when the brain can hear a steady beat, that's called beat awareness, and then repeat a steady beat, that's called beat competency. What that does is develops the inner voice in our brain, that little voice that talks to you. They call it your internal dialogue. The little voice that just said, yeah, I have a little voice like that. That little voice is how we sound out letter sounds and how we put words together. And that little voice starts to emerge at age 3 to 5. That's why 2-year-olds have no remorse. And that's why the younger kids don't understand sometimes what you're saying, because they don't have that internal dialogue to help them process. So when we use music and even rhythms like bouncing a basketball, jump rope is awesome, even juggling has a certain rhythm to it, we're developing the language part of the brain, which is powerful as well.
Okay, good. Question about secondary students, and wondering if these strategies apply all the way up K through 12. I think from a couple of the questions we received, people are wondering, does this mainly apply to elementary, or is it all the way through K through 12?
I always tease about that, and I say this information is for anybody that has a brain or knows anybody that does. Because even with the information about the teenage brain, we know that their brain is changing almost daily because they're in a heightened level of neural pruning. They're pruning neurons at a little bit greater rate than the rest of us are, so they lose quite a bit of information. Dr. Medina tells us to repeat to remember and remember to repeat, especially with those teenagers. And they need to move in their classrooms as well. Their bodies and brains are changing so quickly. They actually need, I've seen statements like they need as much or more activity and exercise in their life as a 2-year-old. Now think about that for a minute, because 2-year-olds never stop moving.
Right.
So, and their bodies and brains are changing most definitely. And I'm going to say, even in college age, this is for everyone. Lots of research on the aging brain that we need exercise. So it definitely goes all the way up. Now, obviously, what makes it different in middle school, high school, is how you act it out. Like, you wouldn't want to do your cutesy little dances or whatever necessarily, but, acting out, for instance, acting out the periodic table by having them sit in their classroom in periodic table order, and then each person pop up and say something about their element of the chair that they're sitting in. So there's lots of different ways to do it, and it has to be age appropriate, developmentally appropriate. But yes, definitely, middle school and high school need that.
Okay, good. A lot of questions about your book, Jean. Before I ask this question, one of the questions is where can we get it? The book's called Thinking on Your Feet. It is available in the Gopher catalog. One of the questions is, are the lessons in your book specific to elementary, or do they go K through 12?
Well, I thought, this is true confession, I taught K through 6 when I was teaching these lessons, but I have people that use these books as college textbooks. I also have many middle school and high school teachers that use my books, because you remember I was talking about building capacity. We assume that middle school, high school students and teachers know their addition facts or know their multiplication facts. Not necessarily. So you go way back, and you build upon what they know and bring them up from there when you're building that cognitive capacity. And what I love, especially about middle school and high school physical education teachers, they can look at an activity and they modify it right away to that age level, because they're just so good at that. And that's what you need to do. Change the music a little bit, change the academic concept. In other words, if you're doing a relay, and I do one that might be more grade appropriate, just make it 8th grade appropriate by changing the content. We use the same format. You there? Hello?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me all right, Jean?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
I lost you there for a minute.
All right. Question is, does recess accomplish some of the same things as structured PE? And I think what they mean by accomplish the same things, the benefits that physical activity and some of the academic concepts and learning that occurs through physical education class, structured physical education class, how do we get some of those benefits through unstructured time like recess?
Well, recess has a different purpose, if you will, because recess is you're still playing, you're still problem solving, you're out in a social aspect of the brain, you're dealing in a group, some of the same things we do in physical education. What makes and both are good. I wish we had daily recess all the way, pre-K all the way through 12, because all of us need a recess. The definition of recess, by the way, is taking a break from what you're doing and doing something totally different and being in the joy of the moment. Whoa, there you go. So even a recess in a classroom would count as a recess. But the typical recess where you go out on the playground and play, if you will, has purpose. A structured physical education class is movement with intention. It's much more intentional. We are teaching specific skills and specific concepts and strategies that can build their physical literacy. So it's more specific. Both have very good purpose to them, very good value, but it's basically two different things.
Okay.
I think.
Well, thanks, Jean.
I would encourage, and when we are talking to our decision makers about many times it's either or, do we have recess or physical education? The answer is it serves two different purposes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jean. We've got 1 minute left, so before we leave, I want to announce the winner of our Active Academics Fitness and Literacy Activities Pack. Before I do that, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for our Gopher Webinar Solutions. We will have another webinar next month. In the next week or so, keep an eye out for your certificate of participation. Everybody who registered will receive, everybody who's attended will receive a certificate of participation for the hour that we spent here today. The winner of our Active Academics Pack is O'Shane Moran from Pronghorn Elementary School in Gillette, Wyoming. So we've got your contact information, and we'll get that sent out right away. So again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you can join us again next month.